The male reproductive system is anatomically more complex than that of the female, but the female reproductive system is physiologically much more complex compared to males. The role of the female reproductive system not only include production of the female gametes oocytes ova, but her body must also nurture and protect a developing fetus during 9 months of pregnancy, and they continue to nurture the baby by producing milk in the mammary glands. In this presentation, we will study the anatomy of the female reproductive organs, describe the reproductive cycles of the ovaries and uterus, and what happens if the reproductive system is successful in producing an embryo. We will discuss the features of each of the organs comprising the female reproductive system individually, but keep in mind that all of them function together for one purpose, propagation of the species. We will begin with the primary sex organs, the ovaries. The ovaries are paired, almond-shaped organs that are only about 5 cm in diameter, smaller than the testes. They are homologous with the testes in origin and in development. The surface of the ovary is covered by a simple cuboidal epithelium known as the germinal epithelium. This is a very misleading term because it doesn't give rise to anything, and the term germinal implies that something develops from it. In the old days it was thought that it was the source of the female gametes, but now we know that this is not true. Just inside the germinal epithelium is a capsule of dense CT called the tunica albuginea as it is in the male testis. The inside of the ovary contains the stroma and developing ovarian follicles. The tear part of the stroma is called the cortex. This is where the ovarian follicles are found. The inner stroma is called the medulla and this is where blood vessels enter and leave the ovary. Embedded in the cortex are follicles which contain oocytes in various stages of development. The oocytes are surrounded by follicular cells. At any one time, in the ovary of a woman in her reproductive years, various developmental stages of follicles containing oocytes can be found. An ovarian follicle consists of an oocyte surrounded by cells referred to as either follicular or granulosa cells depending on the stage of development. The most immature and least developed are the primordial follicles. They form clusters in the outer cortex called egg nests. These follicles are the reservists. They are dormant and not growing under the influence of pituitary hormones. Primary follicles are beginning to grow under the influence of FSH or follicle-stimulating hormone from the pituitary, and the follicular cells begin secreting estrogen. As development continues, some will grow larger, develop multiple layers of cells called granulosa cells which begin to secrete a fluid called the liquor folliculi. One of these will become the follicle of the month and it will grow larger and larger as the cavity inside the follicle ca. The antrum continues to fill with fluid and stretches the surface of the ovary. Some of the granulosa cells form a stalk that supports the oocyte called the cumulus oophorus. A mid-cycle surge of luteinizing hormone LH causes ovulation, and the oocyte with a ring of granulosa cells attached called the corona radiata is expelled into the pelvic cavity. What is left behind of the follicle becomes a separate little endocrine organ called the corpus luteum. It secretes estrogen, but mainly progesterone. We will see that progesterone acts on the uterine lining in such a way as to support progestation gesterone. The corpus luteum has a limited lifespan. If fertilization does not occur within 14 days of its formation, it involutes and dies forming a white scar on the surface of the ovary called the corpus albicans. Ovulation is a two-step process. First, the dominant, mature ovarian follicle ruptures. Mature follicles are called by several other names, Graafian or vesicular. Second is the liberation of the secondary oocyte surrounded by the corona radiata and a small piece of cytoplasm containing DNA called the first polar body. We will see later that this structure is part of oogenesis, production of oocytes. Once in the pelvic cavity, the secondary oocyte is swept into the uterine tube by the beating of cilia on the fingers or fimbriae of the tube. If the secondary oocyte is not fertilized, it degenerates. If it is fertilized, the oocyte continues its development on its way to becoming a mature ovum. On this slide, we see extremely rare images of human ovulation captured in real time. These photos were taken during a routine hysterectomy in 2008, marking the first documented images of an ovary releasing an oocyte. You can clearly see the follicle swelling and rupturing as the egg is expelled. These images provide remarkable visual confirmation of a process that is usually invisible inside the human body. Atresia is a strange process that leads to the death of ovarian follicles, even those that aren't developing. A 5-month-old fetus has about 7 million primordial follicles. At birth, the fetus has 2 million, she has already lost 5 million follicles by the time she is born. A young adult female has 400,000 follicles. Only one secondary oocyte is ovulated per month for about 30 to 35 years. This equates to 400 to 450 secondary oocytes. At the time of menopause, there are no follicles remaining. The vast majority of the ovarian follicles have undergone a degeneration process called atresia. Remnants of atretic follicles are visible with microscopic examination of an ovary from a female of reproductive age. Oogenesis is the process of making a secondary oocyte and takes years to complete. During fetal development, two in oogonia multiply rapidly by mitosis and then enter a growth phase and lay in nutrient reserves. Gradually, primordial follicles begin to appear as the oogonia are transformed into primary oocytes and become surrounded by a single layer of flattened follicular cells. The primary oocytes begin their first meiotic division, but become stalled late in a stage called prophase I, and do not complete it. These follicles remain in suspended animation all through childhood, about 10 to 14 years. At puberty, about 250,000 oocytes remain and a small number of primary oocytes become activated each month by the mid-cycle surge of LH. The one that will eventually be ovulated, continues meiosis I and produces 2 haploid cells each with 23 chromosomes. The smaller cell is called the first polar body. The larger cell, which contains nearly all the cytoplasm of the primary oocyte, is T. He secondary oocyte. The secondary oocyte will be ovulated, but it won't finish its reduction division, known as meiosis II, unless it is penetrated by a sperm cell. With that, the second polar body is expelled, leaving a mature ovum with a single copy of the haploid number 23 of chromosomes. The process of oogenesis is very different than spermatogenesis. One spermatogonium divides twice meiotically, producing 4 mature haploid sperm, and this process is continuous. In oogenesis, only a single mature ovum is formed from the oogonium, and this happens only if the secondary oocyte is fertilized. The remainder of the reproductive structures are secondary female sex organs. The uterine or fallopian tubes are paired and about 4 inches long. They lie between the folds of the broad ligament. The infundibulum arrow 1 is a funnel-shaped opening lying close, but not physically attached to, the ovary. The fibrae 2 are finger-like extension of the infundibulum. The ammupla 3 is the widest and longest part of the tube, and is the site where fertilization usually takes place. The isthmus 4 is short and narrow and leads into the uterine cavity. The wall of the uterine tubes consists of ciliated cells which move the secondary oocyte or zygote towards the uterus, and secretory cells which nourish these structures. The middle muscularis consists of inner circular and outer longitudinal layers of smooth muscle. Peristaltic contractions coupled with ciliary beating move the secondary oocyte, zygote or blastocyst to the uterus. It takes about 7 days to complete the journey. Outer layer of the uterine tube is a sericea. The wall of the uterus consists of 3 layers. The outermost is the perimetrium or sericea. The middle layer is the myometrium, which consists of 3 layers, an inner longitudinal, middle circular layer which is the thickest of the 3, and an outer longitudinal layer. The innermost layer is the endometrium. The endometrium is the primary target for hormones produced by the ovarian follicles. It is lined with a ciliated, secretory epithelium, and contains uterine glands. It is the superficial part of the endometrium that is sloughed off during each menstrual cycle. There are numerous B lymphocytes and plasma cells in the lamina propria to prevent infections that could spread to the peritoneal cavity. The endometrium is subdivided into 2 layers. The functional layer is sloughed off during menstruation and then is replaced each month. It is supplied by spiral arteries. The size, shape and secretory activity changes throughout the menstrual cycle under the influenced by ovarian hormones. The basal layer is the deepest layer. It is permanent and will serve as the source of new epithelium and lamina propria to replace the sloughed off functional layer. The female reproductive cycle includes both the ovarian and uterine menstrual cycles. It occurs in non-pregnant females between the ages of 11 to 50, and involves cyclic histological and physiological changes in both the uterus and ovary. Each cycle takes about 1 month. The primary function of the female reproductive cycle is to get an oocyte ready for fertilization, and to get the uterus ready to receive a zygote should fertilization take place. The ovary is the target of the pituitary gland, and the uterus is the target of the ovary. The phases of the ovarian cycle are divided into the follicular phase or pre-ovulatory phase, and the luteal or post-ovulatory phase. The phases are named based on what structure in the ovary is playing the primary role, the ovarian follicles or the corpus luteum. During the follicular phase, follicle-stimulating hormone FSH from the pituitary gland stimulates the growth of about 20 ovarian follicles, but only one will become dominant. The follicles secrete estrogen which builds up in the bloodstream. The estrogen targets the endometrium of the uterus causing it to grow. The dominant follicle secretes inhibin as well as estrogen. Inhibin prevents more than one follicle from developing that month by turning down the release of FSH. When the level of estrogen reaches a certain level, it causes the pituitary to release LH. The LH surge causes the maturation of the dominant follicle and ovulation. The corpus luteum formed following ovulation secretes estrogen, but mainly progesterone which works on the uterine glands causing them to grow and secrete glycogen-rich mucus and other goodies should fertilization take place. The corpus luteum also releases inhibin which works on the pituitary to stop the LH surge thereby preventing a second ovulation. The uterine cycle consists of phases as well. What happens to the endometrium of the uterus depends on what hormones the ovaries are secreting. The functional layer of the endometrium goes through a monthly cycle of growth, secretion, and then death and sloughing off. The first day of the cycle is when menstrual bleeding first appears. Menses last for about 5 to 7 days. Beginning at about day 7, estrogen from the growing follicles work on the endometrium to repair and regenerate the functional layer. This phase of the uterine cycle is called the proliferative phase because the endometrium is growing. It is also known as the estrogenic phase because it is estrogen from the ovary that is causing its growth. Following ovulation, the corpus luteum secretes progesterone which target the glands in the endometrium. As levels of progesterone rise, the glands in the functional layer begin secreting. Thus, this phase of the uterine cycle is called the secretory or progesterone phase. It occurs during the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. The last part of the female reproductive system to discuss are the mammary glands. They begin development during the 7th week of embryonic life as a thickening of the epithelium that runs from the axilla to the inguinal region. This is called the milk line and is present in males as well as females. In humans, only 2 regions along the milk line develop into mammary glands. Recall that mammary glands are modified apocrine sweat glands. Each gland consists of 15 to 20 lobes and each lobe is divided into lobules which are made up of the secretory alveoli. Surrounding each secretory alveolus are myoepithelial cells which move milk through the ducts towards the nipples in response to a suckling stimulus. The lactiferous ducts deliver the milk to the lactiferous sinus and then out the nipple. The pigmented region around the nipple is called the areola.